It's the oldest enduring electoral system in the world, and many of its traditions have been unchanged for centuries. The conclave, which literally means locked with a key, dates back to a time when cardinals were locked in until they chose a new pope. Now it's the world that's locked out, figuratively speaking, as much of the conclave will take place behind closed doors. The gathering begins with a morning mass in St. Peter's Basilica. In the afternoon, the 115 voting cardinals, those under 80 years old, enter the Sistine Chapel, where each will take an oath of secrecy. The penalty, automatic excommunication. After the oath, preparations are made for the election, taken by secret ballot. Lots are drawn to select 3 cardinals who will help collect ballots, 3 more cardinals to count the votes, and 3 others to review the results. Printed on the ballots, the words, "Eligio in summum pontificum," meaning, "I elect as supreme pontiff." Each elector writes the name of one candidate on the lower half of the ballot and folds it in half. Cardinals are not allowed to vote for themselves. Then, in order of seniority, the cardinals take their ballots to the altar. Each places a folded ballot onto a small disc, and then the ballot is dropped into a chalice. Once all the votes are cast, the ballots are tallied, and the results are read aloud. More than a 2/3 majority is needed to declare a winner, in this case 77 votes. If there is no winner, there's another vote. If there is still no winner, 2 more votes are scheduled for the afternoon. Voting continues, up to 4 ballots each day, until there is a winner. The ballots are burned after each session in an incinerator inside the chapel. If there's no winner, they're burned with a chemical that gives off black smoke, telling the crowd waiting in St. Peter's Square that a new pope has not yet been selected. When there is a winner, white smoke, a sign from the cardinals that they have chosen a new pope to lead the church.
Worldmud was founded in 1992 with the goal of creating the first truly international, university-level Model United Nations conference in the world. It was held in Poland just a year and a half after the fall of the Berlin Wall to make clear its mission of bridging gaps and bringing people of different cultures, beliefs, and ways of life together. In Poland, we had around 300 students. Today, we have over 2,400 from over 110 nations. We have many students from Europe, students from Africa, students from South Asia and the Middle East, students from East Asia, Australia, and Oceania, students from North America, and students from South America. We have delegations coming from Venezuela, which is experiencing an extremely trying time of financial and social hardship, who have gone to extraordinary lengths and climbed seemingly insurmountable obstacles to be here today. And there are many other Worldmud delegations and individual delegates who can say the same. Holy Father, you have inspired us and reminded us of the connecting and loving power of the Church of Christ. Through your words and your deeds, you have challenged world leaders to devote themselves to the disadvantaged and to applying the principles of service and justice. You have stood up clearly and powerfully on the most pressing issues of our time, including global inequality and social justice, the human rights of refugees, interfaith dialogue, and environmental protection and climate change. By your character and your actions, you have reminded all of Christ's words, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Today, the international community faces great challenges over fundamental issues. Questions of immigration, religious violence, race, and economic justice continue to divide us, and the climate surrounding today's political dialogue is often characterized by fear, tribalism, and isolationism. As participants, of Harvard World Model United Nations, we are here today because we seek to learn the power of cooperation, connection, and positive engagement. To me and to many others around the world, Holy Father, you are a symbol of compassion in the face of fear, acceptance in the face of exclusion, and love in the face of hatred. We are honored and blessed by your presence and your wisdom today, Holy Father.
During his usual Wednesday general audience, the Pope had an unexpected visit, one with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It's a great honor to meet you. I wanted to come here and say thank you very much for protecting the nest, and we must communicate the importance not only about climate change, but about how many people die every year because of pollution. 7 million. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
As a follow-up, the actor and politician gave Pope Francis a book called California, the Golden Land of Promise. When giving the Pope the book, he said he hopes they can solve this problem once and for all. In return, Pope Francis gave him and some of the people with him the medal for the Jubilee year. Another person in the visiting party gave the Pope a jacket called Cowboy Blazer, complete with fur and a picture of cowboy boots.
Very freddo per the mountain. Grazie mille.
After everyone had the chance to meet Pope Francis, the group briefly said goodbye and continued on their way.
Thank you for your time.
Leonardo DiCaprio greeted the Pope in perfect Italian. An excited Pope asked the actor to take a seat in English. They had a longer conversation with a translator present. The actor is deeply involved in the environmental activism movement, which the Pope has become a key figure in since the publication of Laudato Si. After their conversation, DiCaprio introduced the Pope to his father. The actor gave the Pope a book with pictures from the 15th century Flemish artist Bosch. He explained what the images meant to him.
Hanging above my crib as a young boy. My father put it there. And as a child, I didn't quite understand what it all meant. But through my child's eyes, it represented our planet, the utopia that we've been given.
He also gave the Pope a donation for environmental causes. The Pope in return gave him 2 of the most important texts of his pontificate. As the actor was leaving, the Pope repeated his request, and DiCaprio responded, again, that he wouldn't forget.
Mi esposo François, como usted su tocayo, le quiero dar las gracias por hacerme embajadora del olivo. Lo voy a tomar en serio, ¿eh? Ojalá podamos trabajar muy bien. Ya lo voy a... No se puede hacer mucho, se puede hacer.
Pope Francis's trip to Ireland has been met with mass demonstrations against clerical abuse scandals that have taken place in Ireland. Pope Francis gave a mass on Sunday in front of hundreds of thousands and gave a speech where he addressed the abuse carried out by the Catholic Church personnel in Ireland and asked for an apology on behalf of the Church. However, he offered no practical solutions to address what had happened. His visit is the first to Ireland since 1979, and the reaction has been very different to that time when Pope John Paul II arrived, who was treated effectively like a rock star. Now, the abuse scandal in Ireland is one of various abuse scandals that have mired the Catholic Church around the world in countries like Chile, Australia, and the United States. So the reaction this time in Ireland is much more muted to the Pope's visit, and people are angry at the scandals that have engulfed the Church. The openly gay Prime Minister of Ireland on Saturday gave a speech and urged the Pope to use his office and influence to deliver justice and to the victims and to the families and to the relatives, those who have suffered the abuse by the Catholic Church in Ireland.
In a bombshell of a report, a former Vatican official is claiming Pope Francis knew the troubled history of abusive ex-Washington, D.C. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Archbishop Carlo Vigano made the claims in an 11-page document that concluded with calls for the Pope to resign. Vigano says church officials ignored allegations about McCarrick from as far back as 2000. Pope Francis accepted McCarrick's resignation last month after investigators determined credible child sexual abuse allegations against him. It's also claimed the Pope said bishops should not be right-wing, like Philadelphia's Archbishop Charles Chaput. Well, a spokesman for the Archdiocese said the Archbishop enjoyed working with Archbishop Vigano during his tenure as Apostolic Nuncio to the United States and found his service to be marked by integrity to the Church. They declined further comment.
Pope Francis made his first comments after a former archbishop called for him to resign. Carlo Maria Vigano says the Pope did nothing after he told him about sexual abuse allegations against Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, and that the Cardinal was already under sanction at the time, but that the Pope rehabilitated him. Pope Francis was asked about the allegation during an airborne press conference. Saying in Italian, he said, "I read that statement this morning. I read it, and I will say sincerely that I must say this to you and to all who are interested. Read the document carefully and judge it for yourselves. I will not say one word on this. I think the statement speaks for itself, and you have sufficient journalistic capacity to reach your own conclusions. It is an act of trust. When time will pass and you'll draw the conclusions, maybe I'll speak. But I'd like that you do this job in a professional way." Francis accepted McCarrick's resignation as cardinal last month after a U.S. church investigation determined that an accusation he had sexually abused a minor was credible. Angela Lang for CBS.
The white church, we thought they was finna answer some questions about the Catholic scandal. They ain't answered at all.
Pope Francis is under fire today. A former Vatican ambassador to Washington has written a letter calling for the Pope to resign and says he knew about the sexual abuse scandals against Cardinal McCarrick as early as 2013 and did not act. But Pope Francis addressed the claims against him, saying, quote, "I will not say one word on it." He went on to tell reporters, quote, "Read the documents carefully and judge it for yourselves." So I'll kick this off because we kind of had a debate about this early on, and I don't know if when something goes wrong, this has been a problem for a long, long time in the Catholic Church, and I don't know if something, just taking out the head or the cardinal in this place or the Pope in this particular instance, is the right answer. Does that solve anything that happens? What goes on across the nation?
I think that what's happened is you have such a corrupt institution. And when it really comes down to it, let's go biblical because it seems the appropriate time to do that. Proverbs 28:13. You will never succeed in life by covering up your sins. You must confess them, you must rid yourself of them, and God will show mercy on you. If we're talking about a religious institution, why aren't we going into religion and actually going to the Bible to see what it says? Because I think it's pretty clear. No. We continue to try to cover things up as opposed to just being honest and transparent in order to move forward.
Instead of the Bible, why don't we go to the cops? I think seeing a couple people hauled off to jail on the front page of the newspaper, on your news feed, might put the fear of God into some people. I don't know why we're having a pleasant chit chat and the Pope can decide whether he's going to respond. I think there needs to be investigators going through all their documents. There need to be some indictments handed down, and once these people start going to jail, I think we'll see a little change.
There is a problem with that, Al, and that's jurisdiction. And I hate to get legal on you, but the Vatican is an enclosed county. It has its own police. It has its own law. It literally is run by the Pope. So in order to get the police involved, I agree with you. What he's saying here is, I told you in 2013 about a letter. If that's true, that has legal consequences if the Pope knew. But because it's so well insulated, that it's hard to actually infiltrate the Vatican. So at some point, someone, whether it be the Pope or not, needs to say there needs to be an opening for us to get in there, because no one
and we're depending on the people raping children to give us that opening.
Well, I mean,
no wonder it's worked out so well so far.
Yeah, you can't say that about the whole, because it's a few of a whole, Al. And I understand it's a problem, it's a
pervasive
statement.
though, Jeff.
And I'm Catholic, and there needs to be something done.
Yeah.
But you can't say that, because then you could say that about people, about religions, about cultures. So you can't say that about the whole Catholic religion.
No, there's no thing like I used to teach middle school. You never say the whole or all.
Right.
You know, but this is a problem to the point that we all know about it, and I feel like we have to do something. We can't say this is a problem. This needs to be addressed. What does that mean?
And the Pope's not taking concrete steps to do so.
I'm talking about human beings being locked up forever, because we keep talking about these children like, oh, they molest these children. They have essentially killed these children and the relationships they'll have with their spouse, the relationship they'll have with their children. Being able to trust an adult for the rest of their lives. Some of them will go on to molest other people. So that's what we all have to wait for. We will never know the spiderweb effect of what these people have done. And as we sit here and let this continue to happen, they're doing it right now. Somewhere in the country, somewhere in the world, this is happening right now while we sit here and sip our coffee and say something must be done. Again, just like the gun thing, we do nothing, we sit back, and at the end of our lives, this will be our report card. What did our generation do? What did us 40, 50-year-olds, we did nothing.
I think each person needs to worry about themselves and be more proactive in their own lives and their community. That's what I think needs to be done. People need to stop waiting on other people to do something, and people need to be proactive themselves.
Yes, sir. I was getting ready to say something about them.
The bishop's announcement came at the end of an emergency summit with Pope Francis. All 31 active bishops and 3 retired ones in Rome signed a document offering to step down and put their fate in the hands of the pontiff. And for more on this, we can cross to our Rome correspondent, Josephine McKenna. Josephine, hello, thank you for being with us. How much of a surprise move is this for the Vatican?
Well, Nadia, this is extraordinary news. All 34 of the bishops tendered their resignation. They made an announcement saying they were ready to resign after Pope Francis had summoned them to the Vatican for these talks behind closed doors, which took place over several days. And we saw this incredible statement from the bishops read out by Fernando Ramos, who said that they had made grave errors and omissions. And they also asked for the forgiveness of victims and also congratulated the victims for their perseverance and courage. And that's quite extraordinary. And as well as that, overnight, there was a leaked report that has been confirmed by the Vatican, where Pope Francis himself said that the entire Chilean church hierarchy was responsible for grave defects that had seriously damaged the church in Chile. So we're not quite sure how Pope Francis is going to react to this, but he himself has admitted to making errors in his handling of these allegations and has had individual meetings with abuse victims at the Vatican himself. So it's a huge watershed, I think, for Pope Francis as the world is watching and waiting to see whether he will respond to this offer of resignation.
That's right, because this comes after the Pope's meeting with Chilean victims of sexual abuse.
That's right. In January this year, on a trip to Chile, Pope Francis initially tried to underplay the allegations, in particular against one bishop, Juan Barros, who was accused of witnessing and ignoring abuse. He later admitted he might have been misinformed. He invited victims, I should say, to the Vatican to meet him. And those victims told the media they were very moved by the individual apologies that they received from Pope Francis. So this is really a significant move, and we can see that Pope Francis certainly is taking this issue seriously, It'll be interesting to see whether the Vatican actually begins a broader investigation of Chilean seminaries and practices there, as Pope Benedict XVI did in 2010 in Ireland. But certainly a major moment for Pope Francis. And as I said, the world is watching to see how he will respond to this offer of resignation.
Josephine McKenna reporting there from Rome. Thank you very much for that.
We start with the news breaking that Germany's most senior cleric has offered his resignation to Pope Francis. Munich's Cardinal Reinhard Marx said that he wanted to share responsibility for what he called the catastrophe of sexual abuse by members of the Catholic Church. Marx has long been a leading voice in the call for church reforms. Those calls have been growing louder as sex abuse investigations revealed a decades-long cover-up by the clergy. Let's get more on this developing story with our religious affairs correspondent, Martin Gach. Martin, give us some background. Why this letter and why now?
So the first thing that should be said is that this took most of us observers by surprise. I mean, quite clearly there has been a bit of tension building between the German church and the Vatican. And I think at the core of the discussion is really the pace of reform and the pace of movement in terms of investigating sexual abuse cases and reforming the church, not just so that past crimes will be addressed, but also in terms of preventing future crimes. The German church became really a trailblazer in terms of dealing with the scandal, whereas the Vatican, understandably so to some degree, because obviously it's a much, much larger institution, which has a lot more provinces with a lot more conservative spaces, was much heavier and much slower. Marx's position essentially shows that the discontent, at least among some very prominent German church members, is strong enough to see something like, exiting the church from in an authoritative position.
The Catholic Church is facing a dead end. That's a direct quote from the Cardinal's letter. I think anyone hearing that would say it's a devastating verdict, right?
It's a devastating verdict by a cardinal, it's a devastating verdict by one of the highest and probably the most prominent Catholic figure in terms of the public presentation of the Catholic Church in Germany. So, I mean, this is, if nothing else, this is really a complete disaster in terms of PR for the church. I think that the point that is made in the letter, and it's made repeatedly, is that the German position concerning what has now been known as the synodal path, which is essentially the attempt by the German church to look at necessary reforms that had been recommended not only by the church itself, but by external consultants, NGOs, groups of past victims, etc., which was actually a way to try to reform the church, and that the Vatican has tried to stop, has really come to a breaking point. As far as Marx is concerned, and this is what the letter clearly states, as you just quoted, is that the position that the Vatican has taken, and I think that to some degree this is a direct pointing at fingers at the very top of the Vatican hierarchy, so at the Pope, at Pope Francis himself, essentially will lead to a dead end. So there is no reform that obviously Marx sees as a possibility in the current policy of the Vatican.
Martin, very quickly in the 30 seconds we have left, how big a deal is this? In other words, how important a figure is Cardinal Marx in Germany and in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church itself?
I think that, to Catholics in Germany, obviously this will be shocking because they are paying attention to the church and because this is a household name for those of us who had been looking at the Vatican. The broader world will probably not remember this resignation unless, of course, there is a big wake to it. But there is absolutely no doubt that this must have sent shockwaves through the Vatican and the political machine, because this really could be the beginning of a much larger migration from the church, from the German church, or perhaps the European church.
That's DW's religious affairs correspondent, Martin Gach. Much thanks, Martin. Pope Francis today issued a new church law to address the clergy sex abuse scandal that has rocked the Catholic Church. Seth Doan on what it does and
doesn't require.
Pope Francis's sweeping new law makes it mandatory for priests and nuns to report sexual abuse and its cover-up. The decree sets out procedures and timelines for investigations, including those against bishops, and requires every diocese in the world to establish an office to deal with abuse allegations. It mandates dioceses develop simple ways for victims to report, seeks to protect whistleblowers, and puts the onus on the Vatican to respond quickly.
It is a very strong message that disclosure is the order of the day and not silence.
The new law does not mandate reporting to police or prosecutors, though it does say local churches must adhere to the reporting laws in their countries. There are loopholes. Abuse revealed during confession, for instance, would remain secret.
The church is incapable of policing itself.
Sean Doherty is a survivor whom CBS News has followed for months.
I know in the eyes of the world, this is a very big step. However, this is, in our opinion, the church ordering the church to report to the church.
Pope Francis's decree will be used as a framework for U.S. bishops to establish their own measures when they meet next month. While welcoming the tightening of procedures, survivors have been critical that this does not mandate transparency to the public. It also does not address penalties, Jeff, such as the defrocking of convicted priests.
All right, Seth Doan, thank you.
Pope Francis is taking new steps to combat sex abuse in the Catholic Church and to hold leaders accountable. Tina Kraus has the story.
Pope Francis issued groundbreaking church laws Thursday aimed at ending clergy sex abuse. Starting next month, all priests and nuns will be required to report abuse and cover-ups, including those by their superiors, to church authorities. The decree covers sex abuse of minors, child pornography, and the abuse of power.
It introduces sweeping changes on holding bishops accountable for either committing sexual abuse or covering it up.
The Pope's worldwide mandate requires that every diocese establish an office to deal with abuse and develop a way for people to easily and confidentially report it. The new procedures lay out timeframes, responsibilities, and put the onus on the Vatican to respond in 30 days.
But perhaps the most revolutionary thing in this decree is that an ordinary Catholic, if he or she feels frustrated that a complaint made about a bishop is not going to be handled properly, she or he can send this complaint reported directly to the Vatican.
The changes follow the recent dismissal of ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who was once one of the most influential church leaders in the U.S. A church investigation found McCarrick sexually abused minors and adult seminarians. After years of abuse and cover-up, Pope Francis has now vowed to chart a new course for the Catholic Church. Tina Kraus, CBS News.
Pope Francis has refused to accept the resignation of one of Germany's top Catholic bishops over the handling of a sex abuse scandal. Cardinal Reinhard Marx offered his resignation in a letter to the Pope last week. Marx, who is the Bishop of Munich, said he had a shared responsibility for what he called the catastrophe of sexual abuse by clerics. Marx is not accused of committing abuse himself. A study found that nearly 4,000 children, mostly boys, were sexually assaulted by German clergymen between 1946 and 2014. DW's religious affairs correspondent Martin Gag joins us now for more on this story. Martin, put this into perspective for us. Why has the Pope refused Cardinal Marx's resignation?
Well, I mean, it's very hard to say why. I mean, what are the reasons behind? What is quite clear is that in terms of, what was a very, very, very big public relations stunt, we might call it. I mean, it was really a very big deal a week ago. This can only be read as a rebuke in the sense that, now we're talking about offering a resignation, whereas of last week, it really looked like, he was really just presenting a resignation, closing the doorknob position of power. Now what we have is the Pope essentially saying, no, I mean, you're going to stay where you are. Of course, hard to say why, but clearly it has a lot to do with institutional integrity. So the game is clearly not at an end, and now it is for Cardinal Marx essentially to say something, because this obviously cannot be the last word.
So what could be the next step then for the Archbishop of Munich? He's one of the Catholic Church's most senior figures and a known liberal cleric.
It's really very, very difficult to say, and we should underline that everything here is speculation. I mean, mainly because the story, I mean, is a pretty dramatic story, and this is a dramatic twist in an already dramatic story. But I think that we can expect one of a few things. We can expect simply Marx to go back from where he came from, which is a prominent position, and continue his job without basically addressing the response of the Pope. That would be very, very strange, particularly because he's a very important public figure, and because a lot of what he brought to the table, I mean, what was included in his letter of resignation, had a lot to do with the sexual abuse scandal and essentially the accusation of a broad cover-up. The next question would be whether he would take a more senior, or be offered a more senior position to actually deal with the things that he has expressed dissatisfaction with. That is not something that, you know, it's clear, but that could be one way in which the Vatican tries to essentially go over the qualms and the reservations expressed by Marx in his letter. The other thing that obviously is on the table as well is a clear break within, or a clear tension within the Catholic Church of Germany, in which a very, very conservative figure like Wölki in Cologne, who has been under great pressure, has refused to resign, and Marx, who has not been accused of any kind of missteps or any kind of abuse, has actually taken the resignation, saying the state of the church is such that the only way to actually move forward is for me to resign. So this tension, I think, will be brought back to be visible, will be brought back to the top of the agenda, as far
Martin,
as I can tell.
Does this situation, is this a German problem, or does it point to a wider crisis of the Catholic Church?
Well, I mean, last week, the American specialized media was abuzz with the question as to what was next for Cardinal Marx and what was he going to be offered. Obviously, he's not a household name in the US or in the rest of the Catholic world in the way that it is in Germany, because he's here also a fairly important public figure. Nonetheless, he is a powerhouse within the progressive and reformist wing of the church, and he has a very close relation with the Pope, and he has a massive footprint in Vatican politics over the last 5 or 6 years.
Our religious affairs correspondent Martin Gack there in Berlin. Thank you, Martin.
They asked the new Pope, they was like, new Pope, new Pope, what do you think about homosexuals? New Pope said, who am I to judge?
In other developments that we are tracking, the Vatican has forbidden blessings to same-sex relationships. In the latest decree approved by the Pope Francis, the Vatican has said that priests cannot bless same-sex unions. The Roman Catholic Church has described such relationships as, quote, not ordered to the Creator's plan, and that the blessings of homosexual unions cannot be considered. The Vatican's doctrinal watchdog Holy See has issued an explanatory note that carries the weight of a universal ground rule for the Roman Catholic Church. It refers to homosexuality as a choice and says it cannot be recognized as objectively ordered to God's plan. The statement also says, and I'm quoting, God does not and cannot bless sin. The Church does not have and cannot have the power to bless unions of persons of the same sex. The decision is a setback for Catholics who had hoped for the institution to modernize with time, especially in regards to homosexuality. Dozens of countries, including many in Western Europe, have legalized same-sex marriages. The Vatican's resistance to embrace the LGBT community has alienated it from younger followers. The Church considers marriage as an exclusive union of man and woman. However, Pope Francis had taken an unprecedented welcoming tone towards the LGBT community. During his early papacy days, Pope Francis had made a remark about gay people trying to live a Christian life.
Cattivo. Se una persona è gay e cerca il Signore e ha buona volontà, ma chi sono io per giudicarla?
This was July 2013, when Pope Francis had said that gay people should not be marginalized but integrated into society. The chief pastor of the Roman Catholic Church was responding to reporters on his flight back from Brazil. After over 7 years, the latest decree suggests that the Pope does not favor a dramatic overhaul of the Church's teachings. Across several countries, the Catholic Church has long fought against LGBT rights. The past popes have called same-sex unions as quote-unquote moral evil, and officially the Church teaches homosexual acts as disordered.
Gaude letare Virgo Maria, alleluia. Aiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Some major news from the Vatican as Pope Francis expresses his support for gay couples. Welcome back. I'm Christine Johnson.
I'm Maurice Dubois. Francis becomes the first pope to endorse same-sex unions.
His remarks are part of a new documentary. CBS 2's Natalie Duddridge has reaction.
We can make a difference.
In the new documentary film Francesco, which premiered at the Rome Film Festival today but has not yet been released internationally, Pope Francis endorsed gay civil unions, saying, quote, "Homosexual people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God." This is the first time Pope Francis has made such a clear public statement. He had expressed support for civil union for same-sex couples when he was Archbishop, but never as pontiff until now. His comments making waves around the world and here at home.
It's exciting. I grew up as a Catholic, and I have since. I'm still faithful, but I don't practice, but because I am a gay man.
Josh Busher was married to his husband Brian in 2014, 3 years after gay marriage was legalized in New York and eventually in all 50 states in 2015. But many Christian churches are still not in agreement with same-sex unions.
I know that it's been hard for a lot of gay people in the church because of the discrimination against us. But now, hopefully, they all take this on themselves and they use the words from the Pope.
The term same-sex civil union grants most or all of the rights as marriage without the title of marriage, which some churchgoers still feel is sacred.
It shouldn't be called marriage. If you want to do what you want to do, a union, but not a marriage.
Despite the departure from the church's long-standing teachings, some parishioners here at Queen of Angels Roman Catholic Church say they support the Pope's position.
I personally agree with what the Pope says because I think all human beings have the same rights.
We reached out to the Archdiocese of New York and the Brooklyn Diocese. Officials say without seeing the complete film Francesco, they could not comment at this time. In Sunnyside, Queens, Natalie Duddridge, CBS 2 News.
Francesco, the documentary, premieres in North America on Sunday at the Savannah Film Festival.
I was talking about we all got to be able to laugh at the end of the day.
I'm Ann Makovic at the Live News Desk with big news for the Catholic Church and society in general. Pope Francis has just endorsed same-sex unions for the very first time as Pope.
Un'altra volta.
The Pope's commentary coming while being interviewed for this documentary, Francesco, which premiered today at the Rome Film Festival. In it, the Pope delves into the issues he cares about most, including the environment, poverty, and the people most affected by discrimination. And he is quoted as saying, "Homosexual people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God." He goes on to say is what we have to have is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered.
Any issue that you see in this movie is specifically him caring about humanity without putting frame or label.
That was the movie's director. Now, while serving as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Francis endorsed civil unions for gay couples as an alternative to same-sex marriages, but he had never come out publicly in favor of civil unions as Pope. Now, we just heard from the Jesuit priest who had been at the forefront of the gay rights movement in the church. The Reverend James Martin said the Pope's speaking positively about civil unions also sends a strong message to places where the church has opposed such laws. Now, the Pope did not directly address this issue when he appeared in public today, but we did notice a day after donning a face mask for the first time during a service, Pope Francis was back to his maskless old ways today, despite surging coronavirus infections across Europe. Of course, that is a side note. That does not diminish the gravitas of today's announcement over his views. In the meantime, a lot of conservatives are asking the Pope for clarification on his remarks. We'll let you know if we hear any of those. Back to you.
We're also following the major news from the Vatican tonight. Pope Francis voicing support for same-sex civil unions, the first pope in history to do so. The Pope saying homosexual people have the right to be in a family, that they are children of God. Here's our foreign correspondent, James Longman, tonight.
Tonight, an historic shift from the leader of an ancient institution. Pope Francis becoming the first pope in the Catholic Church's 2,000-year history to endorse civil unions for gay couples.
This is a man who cries with humanity.
In the new documentary, Francesco, the Pope says homosexual people have a right to be in a family. They are children of God and have a right to a family. It's a major departure from the position of the Vatican's own doctrinal office. The Pope adding, what we have to create is a civil union law. That way, they are legally covered. I stood up for that. The pontiff has called for civil unions in the past, but before he became pope. The emphasis on the legitimacy of the LGBT family is also notable. Experts calling it a monumental moment.
It's a real way of not only speaking pastorally to this group of people, but also speaking lovingly and making them feel more welcome in the church.
Conservative Catholics, though, tonight are calling for clarity. Thomas Tobin, Bishop of Providence, Rhode Island, saying the church cannot support the acceptance of objectively immoral relationships. But Francis's words are striking a chord with a younger generation.
I never thought that I would see something like that in my lifetime.
29-year-old Nicholas Traxler from Minnesota says the Pope's comments speak to his heart.
It's a difficult road for LGBTQ Catholics. I value my faith and my sexuality as equal parts of my identity, but it hasn't always been that way.
Pope Francis has cast himself as the modernizing pope, but he's faced huge opposition from within his own clergy. This latest move could mean the biggest backlash yet, but he may feel he has no choice if he's to survive in a modern age. David?
All right, James Longman with us tonight. James, thank you.
Jesus, you ain't gonna believe what they doing now.
This encyclical comes at a critical moment in human history. The ecological crisis is essentially a spiritual problem. The sin against the environment, the ecological sin.
This is big for the Pope. Consume less and buy less. We have to really rethink our lifestyles.
he blames a lot of it on society's throwaway culture.
He tweeted out that the earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth.
Immense pile of filth.
Pile of filth.
The encyclical Praise Be is the most important papal document ever on the environment, backing the science on climate change, blaming free markets, holding rich nations responsible. Environmentalists and many on the left are cheering the message.
The encyclical is very clear that it does not believe that market mechanisms are going to get us there.
And it's put conservative Catholics like U.S. presidential hopeful Jeb Bush in a tough spot.
I don't get economic policy from my bishops or my cardinals or from my pope.
Since the Argentinian archbishop became pope, Francis has shifted the focus away from the church's conservative stance on things like abortion and made attacks on inequality and the excesses of capitalism central.
He is launching a broadside on many of the things that we take as commonplace.
For some, it's like Occupy Wall Street took over the Vatican.
This is just pure Marxism coming out of the mouth of the Pope.
He has a Marxist background.
By the standards of how South Americans talk about capitalism, he's not radical at all. By the standards of how North Americans talk about it, yeah, he sounds like, Naomi Klein on speed, really.
For Jim Farney, a professor specializing in the intersection of politics and religion, it's not just the message, it's the messenger.
It was a very interesting choice this year. He really, though, stood out to us as someone who has changed the tone and the perception and the focus of one of the world's largest institutions.
Pope Francis has graced magazine covers, attained the glow of celebrity, giving him reach far beyond his flock of 1.2 billion Catholics.
He's a pretty active Twitter user. He's very good with a soundbite. He seems very comfortable around media, and he really seems to have taken it upon himself to use those avenues in a way that previous popes haven't.
The Pope's encyclical blasted previous climate summits for being hijacked by special interests. He'll want world leaders to carry that criticism to the summit in Paris this December.
It would be interesting to know how the conversations he seems to be having with political leaders have gone. What happened in the 10 minutes he had with Mr. Harper last week.
But for a global economy that runs on fossil fuels, the Pope's environmental message is radical.
What he's asking, especially the developed West, to do would be an extraordinary change. Everybody's going to take a large pay cut. Anybody over the middle class is going to see very significant tax increases. The set of public policies he's asking for, it's asking a lot of politicians to go to voters and say, this is what I'm going to do.
On paper, encyclicals are Catholic marching orders, but not in practice. The 1968 ban on contraception isn't exactly followed religiously. Still, on an issue where activists meet apathy, the world's scientists are doubted, and global institutions ignored, a rock star radical from the Vatican at least gets attention.
Who else could or would say this sort of thing and get more traction? Maybe he doesn't get much, but there's not many people that can speak or seem to speak with his type of moral authority. If there is going to be a message on this simply put out there in very bold terms, it's difficult to imagine it coming from anywhere else.
La mayor parte de los habitantes del planeta se declaran creyentes. Esto debería provocar un diálogo entre las religiones. No debemos dejar de orar por él y colaborar con quienes piensan distinto.
Confío en Buda.
Creo en Dios.
Creo en Jesucristo.
Creo en Dios, Alá.
Muchos piensan distinto, sienten distinto, buscan a Dios o encuentran a Dios de diversa manera. En esta multitud, en este abanico de religiones, hay una sola certeza que tenemos para todos. Todos somos hijos de Dios.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor. Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Confío en vos para difundir mi petición de este mes. Que el diálogo sincero entre hombres y mujeres de diversas religiones conlleve frutos de paz y justicia. Confío en tu oración.
Just saying. Gotta be able to laugh.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Prime Minister, my lords, and members of the House of Commons, I have known few greater honors than the opportunity to address the Mother of Parliaments at Westminster Hall. I am told that the last 3 speakers here have been the Pope, Her Majesty the Queen, and Nelson Mandela, which is either a very high bar or the beginning of a very funny joke.